This is an Audi S8 4-litre twin turbo, and it's coming for a misfire. Right, so this is an Audi S8. As you know, we normally do Mercedes, but this was a customer of ours who owns a Mercedes who asked us to take a look at his other car. Driving along one day and it started misfiring. He's had it taken to a garage. I believe it was an Audi dealer, but I'm not 100% sure. It's got a cylinder 1 misfire constantly. They put spark plugs in it, didn't fix it. They put 8 coil packs in it. Again, it didn't fix it. They've now told him that it needs injectors, or at least 1 injector, and they've quoted him a lot of money. Rightly so, because the engine needs to be removed on this to fit injectors, which I will show you why in a moment. So at that point, he's decided to take it out of that garage, and he's brought it to us for further diagnosis to confirm whether or not it does need an injector. This is a 4-litre twin turbo, very similar engine to what's in the C7, C8, RS6. It's also in some Porsche models. And the reason why the injectors are so hard to replace on this engine is because of where they are. So if we remove this cover, as you can see, this is what most people refer to as a hot V engine. So both of the turbos are in the center of the V, whereas normally you would have the intake manifold in the center of the V. On a lot of modern turbo cars, they now put the turbos in the center and the inlet manifolds are down the side, which also means the fuel injectors are down the side. So access to them is not easy at all. So by the book, as in how Audi say to fit an injector to this car, you need to remove the engine, and it's 20 hours labor, which is why the customer at that point has decided to bring the car to us to 100% diagnose whether or not it does need an injector before he commits to that expense. And I mean, realistically, if it does need an injector and you've got to take the engine out, it would make sense to do 8 injectors, but they're nearly £300 a piece. They're direct injectors, and from Audi, they're almost £300. I wouldn't fit aftermarket injectors to this, especially with the amount of labour involved in removing the engine. It makes sense to just use genuine parts and do the job right the first time. As you may see, the front bumper's already off. I'll show you on the diagnostic system, there's a couple of other faults with this car. There's a cylinder 1 misfire, which is the main issue, and it happens the second you start the engine. It doesn't have to be hot, cold, otherwise it just misfires constantly all the time. There's also a cooling fan fault, which is a current fault, won't clear, and there's a coolant temperature sensor fault, which won't clear either. The reason I've got the front bumper off is I've diagnosed those other faults first before looking at the misfire fault, which is something I like to do. If you've ever got a list of faults, it makes sense to not just ignore the smaller faults and go straight for the misfire, because they could all be linked. So what I've done is diagnose the 2 small issues first. I've now found that they're not linked. They're not, or so far I think they're not linked to the actual cause of the misfire. But that's why I've done that. The fan control circuit fault, I've taken the front bumper off because next to both front fans there is a small fuse box, and they have individual fuses that power the fans. One of the fuses is blown, so that's why fan number 2 doesn't work. It looks like there's water ingress into the fuse box, which has then corroded the fuse, and it's blown. So we're going to have to replace that fuse and get to the bottom of why there's water getting into the fuse box, whether it needs a new fuse box because the seal's perished, or whether it needs sealing up to some degree. That will fix that fault code. The other fault code, engine coolant temperature sensor, circuit high. If you go into the live data, it's reading minus 40 degrees constantly, which is the default value with these. If either the wiring is damaged or the sensor fails, it will just read minus 40. And quite an easy diagnosis. What I found is the coolant temperature sensor is down the front of the engine, and it's just broken. Where the pins go into the sensor and the plug, it's just completely snapped off. Not sure how that's happened. The wiring and the plug itself is okay, just needs a new sensor, and that will fix that. So now we've diagnosed those, we're going to look into the cylinder 1 misfire. We've got the airbox out. First thing we've noticed initially is someone's made a repair to the wiring from the coil packs, the earth wires. Not a very good repair, so we will sort that out. However, at this point I don't think that is the cause of the misfire, so we'll continue looking. We've got the wiring all out the way. So at this point we can see that it's had new coil packs. We're now going to remove cylinder 1 coil pack and the spark plug. and then see what we can find. The end of the plug is very clean and it smells of fuel. It's actually slightly wet. That says to us the injector is working due to the fact that it's cleaned the end of the plug. There's no carbon at all on the end of the plug, so you can see there's no combustion taking place. It's definitely misfiring. It doesn't tell us that the injector is 100% okay, but it does tell us that it's working. So we're going to put a camera down this bore, or down the cylinder. We're going to inspect the cylinder walls, the valves, the tip of the DI injector, and see if we can find the issue. So we've put the camera down the cylinder, turned the engine over, inspected the cylinder walls, which are all fine. But what we have found is that the intake valves on cylinder one valve fully closes, but the other intake valve never closes. It moves up and down slightly, but even at its most closed point, there's approximately a 5mm gap between the cylinder head and the valve. So it basically has zero compression on cylinder 1. And at this point, I do not think it needs an injector, but it clearly has a major valve train issue. And to investigate any further, we will need to remove the engine. There's no rocker cover as such to remove on these. It's a metal rocker cover and it holds the cams down. So the only way of getting to what we need to get to is to drop the engine out, removing the rocker cover, time up the engine. It's a major job to get to what we need to 100% confirm what is wrong with it. I suspect on Audis that I've seen before, possibly a broken valve spring or possibly a rocker issue. But either way, at this point, I'm confident to say it doesn't need injectors, but it does still need engine removal and quite a major strip down to fully diagnose the issue. So with a job like this really shows the importance of getting the car diagnosed correctly rather than just throwing parts at it. In this case, they've gone for spark plugs and coil packs, which alone, I think coil packs are £100 each or so on these. So you're over £1,000 in with 8 spark plugs and 8 coil packs. And then their next step was to drop the engine and replace the injectors, which was thousands more, and it wouldn't have fixed it. They could have put 8 injectors in it, put it back in, it would have been exactly the same. So like I say, it's really important to get your car to somebody who understands them and will diagnose it correctly without just replacing parts. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below.